right, welcome back, everybody. This is the 21st Century Dentistry Podcast. I'm John Harris, and with me today is a good friend and colleague, Mr. Chris Sands with Profi. He owns a dental firm out of Atlanta, Georgia, and just an absolute wealth of knowledge in all things financial and all things dentistry. So I thought it'd be a great idea to bring him on and just have a conversation about what differentiates their approach to the CPA space and what makes them different, and then also leverage some of his expertise this morning to get some insight on how we can, as coaches in the practice management space, get some insight as to how we can provide better support and guidance to our clients. So, Chris, how are you this morning?
Excellent, John. It's a pleasure to be with you again. I think for those who may watch the video, our disclaimer should be that we are not related, contrary to right. We might look. Twins, brothers from another mother. But excited to be here, John, and hopefully we can provide a lot of value today.
Absolutely. I know. I see on your background there, you've got the Financial Floss podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I should do a better job of recording more podcasts, and it was a great name, but actually the name has been trademarked by someone else. I've been given a notice. I haven't recorded on it in a while, but that podcast was something that I started to just talk about everything finance as it pertains to dentistry, both on the business and personal side. So we try to give a lot of tips and have experts like yourself on there to give tips to the dentists in terms of managing their business and improving their finances.
Fantastic. And I do. How familiar are you with like whole life? Do you guys get into that space at all? Like make recommendations, or do you have an outlet where you're able to provide insurance options for your clients?
Yeah. So we are, as a CPA, a lot of times is seen as an authority figure. And I think what my past experience is, a lot of CPAs they're educated on the tax code and what they do, and they don't really go too deep into anything outside of that. So my background began actually in insurance services, and I do have a deep knowledge on it. It's not something that we actively work on or promote. Really, it's something that we're here to be kind of a sounding board and a third party, unbiased, source for every doctor to help explain to them how those things work. And sometimes they have tax advantages, and that's where the conversations pull us in on the tax and accounting side. So yeah, we talk about all things related to finance. I try to know the entire market space of dentistry and know the entire market space of the financial industry.
Very good. Good. I want to leverage your expertise here in just a few minutes, then, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Before we jump into some of the nuts and bolts, can you give us some background on your firm? Like what got you into the CPA space? I believe you have a little bit of or maybe a lot of a practice management background. You saw an opportunity in the financial space and said, look, people aren't, providing the level of service that they could. And then Profi's born. Can you kind of fill in the gaps there for me a little bit?
That's right. So, I'm not a CPA, and I never thought I would be in a CPA business. My story is maybe somewhat unique. I thought I wanted to be in dental practice consulting like yourself, John, but I decided to do an experiment between the years of 2010 and 2012, and I voluntarily went and worked in a dental practice, or it began as a voluntary experiment, 1 day a month. Eventually, I was there 3 days a week, and grew a little 4-chair practice with one doctor as PPO practice. We grew it from 600,000 of collections when he bought it to about 1.7 million in about 2.5 years. And he has since grown to 3 locations, multiple associate doctors, got a little enterprise going. And all of that was just, firsthand real life experience. And through that, my role in that time was everything not clinical, and I never really messed with the insurance companies, but everything else in the practice, from the hiring to the marketing, but primarily the financial aspect of it. I was in charge of the finances. I was running all the reports. And a big part of that was having a role with a CPA. And it was frustrating. We had 3 different CPAs in 3 years because I've had to fire them each year. 2 out of the 3 were dental CPAs. And what I found was that they knew accounting. They had a lot of dentists as clients they did accounting for, but they really didn't know the dental business. They couldn't take the numbers and give me advice on what to go change inside the business. Mm-hmm. And so I had to kind of learn that on my own. I knew how to read a financial statement. And the other problem was I couldn't always get them on time from them. So that frustration stuck with me. And I saw a space, an entrepreneurial void in the space. I found too that a lot of CPAs, just like doctors, they may legally own their business, but they're really just, working at their craft. They're in the chair, just like the doctors are, and they're not really scaling the business. They're not really creating a system where they can stay proactive, and they have a small team and they kind of get swamped at some point. So I saw this void and this problem. All of the other, kind of vendors in dentistry were all bickering about the same thing. So one day I came across a CPA who could speak my language and decided to make him my business partner. And that's Brent, as you know. And we formed Profi 5 years ago. And it's really a managerial accounting firm. It's a more in-depth relationship than just the typical financial accounting firm, which is, most of what's out there, I think, is really just compliance. And everybody wants a relationship. They want advice or coaching from their accountant. They want them to know their business, give them ideas to make it more profitable, help them keep more money in their pocket, mitigate taxes as much as they can. And it's a bloody mess out there. So we had to build it. So we have a system where all of our clients get their financials every single month by the 15th, guaranteed, or they're free. That's a company guarantee we have. That was like the first pillar. They get financial reporting in a very usable and understandable format. But the other unique piece was we included in our service coaching on the financial statements. Okay, not only just explaining them to the doctors, but giving them advice using the finances to see symptoms in the business. Okay, so the finances will show symptoms in the business. And I teach our accountants enough about practice management knowledge to be dangerous. And they'll say, okay, here's some possible causes. And as you know, John, it works really, really well when they're working with a coach like yourself and they go back to somebody like you, or if you join in on those calls and you're able to merge those two worlds. Mm-hmm. So you can actually
it accelerates implementation.
It really does.
Everybody's gone to, and I'm guilty of this too. We go to programs, we learn a lot of really good stuff, and then we get back to the office, and then we get back into the day-to-day operations, and the stuff that we had great intentions with don't carry forward. And then we don't actually see the benefit of it.
Right. And so it's not just, doing the job of accounting and delivering financials or tax returns. It's trying to affect change. Like you said, making implementations and affecting change. And we're big on, just making every doctor a better business owner, telling them that they should have more cash in their business, have liquidity for opportunity and to keep them out of debt, having a debt payoff plan. These were things that were never focused on or never discussed really from my past experiences with dental CPA firms. Talking to them about real estate and the powers of owning their own building, for their practice. That's really supercharges their business. There's immense tax deductions that come along with it, but that ultimately is a big part of them building their net worth and long-term, passive income for retirement. Mm-hmm. And most of dentistry still to this day doesn't do that. I would venture to say or estimate that 9 out of 10 dentists do not own their building. I think the majority of the ones you and I work with probably do.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate statistic. At least they don't own it initially, and sounds like that's certainly something that you encourage them to do. It's absolutely something that I encourage them to do. It makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Real estate's a very, very effective vehicle that you can leverage to build your balance sheet over time. And rather than just paying a lease payment every month and building someone else's balance sheet, it makes sense for you to leverage your business for the cash flow to cover the lease, which you're going to need anyway. And you might as well be the beneficiary of that.
Right. So, I've just found that most CPAs, in my experience, I've come across, aren't doing those things themselves for their business. And so we really like to walk the talk. So, we own our office building. I own other, dental commercial real estate so I can show clients like this is how it works. This is the benefits. But most of again, the CPA world, and this is not just exclusive to dentists or exclusive to CPAs. Most people, when they have a specialized craft, they just do their craft, but their craft can really be a vehicle to help build their net worth, build their life. So,
yeah. One of the things that we talk about often is that, the top 3 wealth development strategies in the United States are you're investing in some operating company or your own operating company, i.e. your practice, owning real estate, and financing deals. And as a private practitioner, as an independent business owner in dentistry, you can have all 3. You can leverage all 3 of those strategies. You can own your practice, invest in that equipment, technology. Studies show that the most profitable practices out there are the ones that are independently owned and leveraging technology. Those are the most profitable practices in the market. And they have happier patients and happier employees. So as an independent private dentist, you can reinvest in the business, make sure that you get the guidance and things that you need, invest in technology, own the real estate, so that you're building that asset over time. And then when the time comes to transition or sell your practice, you can transition pieces of equity over time which is highly encouraged, because a lot of our practices, and you'll notice, want to get your feedback on this too. One of the challenges, like you look at the direction that the industry is going, right? It's heavily in favor of DSOs. Some of those DSOs are private equity funded. Some of those DSOs are just dentist operated, and they're cash flowing their growth, right? Which is great. But you get to a point where your enterprise is so big that another independent, like a guy that graduated dental school 5 years ago and went and worked at PDS and now wants to own a dental practice, he can't just go to a bank and get a loan and buy that practice, because you're collecting $4.5 million, $6 million. So allowing your associates equity opportunity in the business over time is going to obviously promote retention. It's going to incentivize them to reinvest in themselves and gain a more broad skill set. But it also serves as your transition plan, because at some point you can liquidate the last percentage of ownership, and now you've effectively sold that business over time, rather than looking at some transaction that's going to occur out in the future where your market is now much more limited, because the only folks that have pockets deep enough to buy something like that are going to be groups and corporate enterprises.
Yeah. So I think, number one, my opinion is I don't think that private practice will ever fully disappear. Mm-hmm. I think that the practice profile that is most at risk is the solo doctor. Okay. So single location solo doctor. You don't have to have multi locations to survive in this changing market. But the solo practitioner is the most risky model. Okay. It's all dependent on one person. So if for anything else, number one, it's just risk diversification on your career. Yeah. You should have an associate. I would also argue that for the patient, the solo doctor practice is one of the riskiest, because there's nobody looking over their shoulder to check the X-rays and check their work, and they will say that they have the greatest work, but who's really checking that, right? So it's better for the patient, it's better for the practice, but it's better for the entrepreneur, to diversify their risk in case of, disability or untimely death or anything like that. Eternity. And, you can have a longer career if you're able to step away from the chair over time by your choosing, because, dentistry is a physically taxing occupation on the back and neck, eyes, hands. And it's imperative, I think, that every doctor like that, you will not survive. You'll be suffocated out in terms of profit margins if it's the solo practitioner. And the only way to really scale the dental model and to maintain and grow, okay, to maintain profitability, every year expenses still go up. Your growth rate in collections has to go up by a greater amount. But to grow profitability and to maintain profitability over time, the answer to that lies in doctor production. and scaling doctor production, having multiple doctors. So yeah, I believe that they should always have associates. It gives them a backup plan. It gives them a legacy plan, and figuring out over time how to shift that equity over time, and so it's all a win-win. But yeah, we're in this really, really strange time, this perfect storm where more and more of the dentists that are in dental school and residency are female, wanting to work less days a week already. So that's going to change scheduling. More and more do not want ownership up front. Some of that I think is more than just, I think it's just a cultural shift, a generational shift. But a big part of it too is this perfect storm of student loans. That there's, I would say the numbers that I see for somebody out of dental schools, between $300,000 to $500,000 of student loan debt, and if they went to residency, between $500,000 to $700,000 of student loan debt. So that's going to take them longer to become a qualified investor to get that financing. And then you add on top of that, the financing industry, any kind of regulator is always lagging, right? So they haven't caught up to the way that private equities and DSOs are valuing practices, and they're the way that they value practices really is based on their current way that the maximums they'll loan out money. Mm-hmm. Okay. And it's just behind. It's behind the time so far. And I think eventually it will catch up. But what you're talking about, John, really is a great solution, which is, bring a doctor in, vet them, grow them clinically and in their ability to speak to patients, i.e. conversion ability on the treatment planning that they do, and vet them if they're going to be a good possible partner for you, and build in some sort of, sweat equity plan and buy-in over time. So yeah, I think that's one of the only solutions in today's market right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to add a layer to that too. But before I do that, there was a concept that had crossed my mind based on your last comment. I think I've lost it. Should have known that was going to happen. It's too early in the morning, man.
It'll come back
behind you, so it's not as much copies made it to the system just yet. But yeah, I think that's a great plan. Bringing the associate in, having them, distributing to them a percentage of equity. There's a valuation done there. There's a transaction done. They've now bought in. I really tried to, on this podcast, one of my frustrations has always been people are very good at providing a lot of theoretical guidance, so it's very like 50,000 feet. And a lot of people are like, okay, well, what action do I take to actually do that? And so I try to really give people the nuts and the bolts. And so that's that matter of fact, I would say that that's one of the first benchmarks you should be trying to cross as an independent private practitioner is to get that second doctor in there. Because it is liability protection. There are unforeseen circumstances that can take you away from the handpiece, and all of the practice's expenses are completely dependent upon you to turn a handpiece, and your disability is not going to cover all that. So it's liability protection, creates a passive stream of income, which allows you to reinvest in the business. One of the things that had crossed my mind was, or a second layer to that, is if you look at the medical market and look at what private equity did to medical, right? Basically took over. There's very few family owned and operated, privately owned and operated medical practices out there anymore. They're all either affiliated or something, right? But they have a relationship with some corporate entity. And if you look at like what percentage of those services are elective versus what percentage of those services are mandatory, right? Like a dermatologist, or an orthopedist, or
plastic surgeon,
right? So like the experience that you have when you go in those offices is drastically different. You go into a dermatology office and it's like you don't have a choice but to go to them, right? Because it's like you have cancer, right? You've got a cancer. And this hits home for me because I've got a little spot under my eye that I'm having cut off in May. And so I had this experience. I went to the dermatology office. The experience that I had was awful. I was like, customer service was just really, really behind. So that doctor is going to remove this little place under my eye. And immediately after that appointment, I go to a plastic surgeon. And because it's on my face, he's going to clean it up. Okay. The experience between those two is drastically different, right? Like if you've ever been into a plastic surgery office, their customer service is like next level. Okay. The way that they greet you, the way that they answer the phone, the way that the doctor communicates with you. And if you look at plastic surgery, it's like 99% elective. You look at the dermatology office and it's 0% elective. Like you've got to do that. Like if you had a heart attack, you need a stent placed in your heart. Like you don't have a choice but to get that done. Dentistry is 32% elective on average. And I think the practices that have more elective services and have successfully built a patient base on elective services, I think gives them a competitive advantage over the practices that are just doing like that are more emergency oriented or just crown and bridge. They're more limited, which would also support the statement that you made about scaling doctor production, because a GPR provides more services under one roof. We know patients want convenience and affordability and comfort, and it provides all three of those things rather than going to multiple specialists, right? So I think that's another layer there too that helps to scale production, but also helps to insulate private practitioners from the current market trends. So the more comprehensive I am in my skill set, the more defense that I have, the stronger the wall around me than if I'm just doing emergencies and crown and bridge and prophies.
So John, I think you're being too nice about it. Okay, I'll say it another way. I mean, I think if you're a GP doctor, you don't have a choice. Okay, you obviously always have a choice of how you want to practice, but in terms of this is really consumer driven. And the primary consumer, the primary client. And notice I didn't say patient, right? The patient is the butt in the chair, but the client who puts the butt in the chair is typically your 30 to 55-year-old female, your mom, who makes the healthcare decisions. And they want the mall concept, one-stop shop. They want comprehensive under one roof, cradle to grave. And they're, in general, people don't like having to go to two places, scheduling another appointment at a stranger's office. And this is really consumer driven, and dentistry needs to pay attention to their consumers. The GP practice, of the future, I think the majority of the DSO space, they're going to say, you know what, we'll take on the burden of working the insurance systems, the insurance and Medicaid systems. The GP practices will be some insurance, but I think the vast majority in a fee for service and higher cosmetic dentistry, that's going to be the one area of stronghold for GP practices, number one. But it's expected that everything can be done under one roof. And I'll give you this example. It always used to make me chuckle and laugh was, and I didn't know this until I went and worked in a dental practice. As a consumer, we all think, well, two examples. One is wisdom teeth. Okay. Wisdom teeth extractions. In dentistry, we may call them third molar extractions. Most people think, hey, it's a wisdom tooth. Everybody has wisdom teeth. It's pulling a tooth. Isn't that the first thing you learn in dental school is how to pull a tooth? Mm-hmm. Telling me as my dentist, you can't pull my wisdom tooth. Am I with the right doctor? Do you not have the right experience? Mm-hmm. We're going to refer you to this oral surgeon. See, the patient doesn't know, the tooth is impacted. It's behind the ear. We're going to refer you to this oral surgeon. They're like, oral surgeon, is something wrong with me or something wrong with my child that you haven't told me? Why do I have to go to this oral surgeon? It's pulling a tooth. So the consumer has that mindset, okay, until they're educated, right? And the other one is something like, root canals. Root canals have been in, our culture and media. Like everybody knows root canal, and they think every dentist does a root canal. And the vast majority, especially in today's dental schools and programs, they don't teach you a lot of anything in the specialist areas. And, you're like, oh, we have this root canal that we need to be done, and we're going to refer you to an endodontist. And they're like, what's an endodontist? That sounds like a dinosaur, mm-hmm. right? Until they get educated on it. So there's an expectation that my dentist is basically, a super dentist. They can do extractions, they can do root canals, and they can do implants. And that doesn't mean that one doctor has to do all of those things. I think that's kind of the trick that gets played in your mind. You're a solo practitioner, like, well, I don't want to do those aren't procedures I like to do. That's okay. But it's expected from your patient base, the consumers, that your practice offers it. So it doesn't have to be you, but you might need to add another doctor with that skill set, to the practice mix. So you were being nice about it earlier. I say, I think if doctors want to truly survive and thrive and compete with DSOs, the DSOs are going to build it. They're going to do the things that a lot of the private practitioners aren't willing to do. They're going to build it so that the practice does all things under one roof.
Right.
Whether that's training the GPs, taking CE courses and building their skill set over time, or if it's just hiring specialists and creating that mix of doctors within one roof. So GP doctors don't have a choice. They really have to do all things under one roof. And the surgical procedures where a lot of the profit margin lies. And back to your point earlier, I think those doctors that want to do the high-end procedures, getting the associates, starting out, the associates are kind of like the base, to your triangle. Maybe they're doing the primary restorative care, and it frees up your time to do more, surgery, if you will. So implants and doing root canals. And then over time, you can train those associates to become kind of super GPs as well. But yeah, I would say you don't have a choice in this changing market. The consumer has demanded it.
Yeah, completely agree. So if you're in a position and you're trying to bring in an associate either for retention, traditionally I would recommend waiting 12 to 18 months. You don't want to have that conversation really on the front end. I'd kind of like to know if that's where their head's at, right? Like, let's say it's a specialist or, it's a GP that you're bringing in and a GPR, and you're, just a nuts and bolts and bread and butter dentist, and you're wanting to diversify your procedure mix to do all the things Chris just said. Bringing that associate in, I would recommend initially at least somewhere between a 12 and 24 month courtship period, if you would, just to kind of identify, are your values and beliefs kind of on the same page? Like, you could have different personalities. That's actually a good thing, I think, because it makes your clinical team more dynamic with diversity. But when it comes to values and beliefs, I think you need to make sure that your values and beliefs are very much on the same page. That's the one thing that I see disrupts and creates turbulence and more partnerships than anything else. And so after that 12 to 24 month period, you'll have a pretty good idea, do we value and believe the same things? Are we, is our North Star located in the same place? Okay. And then after that period, and this is where I want to pull Chris into, you might do something like a deferred comp program to help promote retention. Because one of the things that, as dentists scale their business and go from one to multiple locations, the number one concern in doing that is having associates in those locations that you can count on that aren't going anywhere. Because you never want that phone call that says, you've got 3 locations and you're one of the primary providers in location number 1, and this associate has found another position somewhere else. Just had this conversation with a friend of mine over in Memphis last week who has 2 locations, and then he was at risk of losing his associate. So we had to get a little creative. But a deferred comp program is a very effective way to retain people long-term, or just go ahead and offer them a % of equity ownership at that particular point in time. But Chris, I wanted to kind of get with you or get some feedback from you on deferred comp. So for those of you that don't know what a deferred comp program is, it's I'm essentially giving the associate the opportunity to benefit from his or her sweat equity, so to speak. So let's say that they've been with me for 2 years and I want to retain them, but they're not yet ready to buy in. And even if I'm willing to do that now, maybe I'm not, but regardless, for whatever reason, they're not buying in now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this account over here to the side. And let's say that this associate's making 33% of collections. And I've done the math. I've looked at my numbers. I've gotten with Chris. I understand the profitability of my practice. And I can afford to pay this associate up to 35%, and it still makes financial sense to me. So based on my contract with the associate, I'm paying them 33%. Well, there's an additional 2% there that I've got available. So I'm going to put an agreement in place that says for every dollar that we collect on your production, I'm going to take 2 cents and I'm going to put it in this account over here. And then after 5 years, you can trade that account in for equity in the business. So we'll do an evaluation. We'll see what it's worth. And let's say that the practice is valued at $1 million and your account has accumulated over that 5-year period to 50,000. Okay. Then essentially what I'm going to do, I'm not going to take that money out and give it to you for you to turn around and give it back to me. I'm going to keep that money right where it's at. And I'm going to give you $50,000 off of 10% equity into the practice. So if it's $1 million, that would be $100,000 worth of equity. And I'm going to give you 10% equity in exchange for $50,000. Okay. Now, when you do that, what happens is I've now created a liability on my balance sheet that says I owe this guy $50,000 5 years from now. Chris, if I say anything that's not right, you correct me. So I've got a liability sitting over here. It's $50,000. And I have to have an asset to offset that liability. And so one really good vehicle for doing that is whole life insurance policies, because they accumulate cash value and you're going to get a higher interest rate in a whole life policy than you would just putting that money in a savings account. So like 4% versus 1.5%. The 4% makes a lot more sense to me. Chris, how, in what ways is that whole life strategy more advantageous? Because there are some tax implications there. You can take loans from your whole life. Can you kind of walk through those details a little bit?
Sure. So, what you're talking about here with deferred comp is what we also call a golden handcuff strategy.
Yes.
Okay. So it's a way to tie a key employee to the business for a set amount of years, set time period. And the plan does not vest at all, like 100% vest at the time period you choose. So in your example, John, 5 years. Mm-hmm. So if this associate along the way, they're accruing and building up this account value, but if they leave before the 5-year vesting period is complete, they get nothing. And the entire time, the asset value of that account is sitting on your balance sheet. You actually can show it to banks. And yeah, your choices of how you fund it. I mean, you can do it with cash. It is more tax advantageous to do something through a life insurance cash values. So the definition of deferred comp is this employee is earning compensation, but not receiving it, not taking it yet. Okay. And possibly no taxes involved all along the way. And then when the owner wants to take the cash value, typically the best way to do that is to loan it out, because the loan is a non-taxable event. Mm-hmm. And so you're able to avoid taxes kind of like all along the way using this strategy. For whatever reason, I think, maybe just because doctors aren't fully educated on the financial industry and the different products that are out there, for whatever reason, they find this to be complicated. I think one of the biggest concerns of any business owner is making sure I have liquidity and control. Mm-hmm. In this type of setup, you absolutely do. And until that vesting period happens, right? And like you said, it's a great way to, instead of actually exchanging the money, to just exchange shares of stock in the business. Okay, at the valuation. I think that the deferred comp is probably one of the best ways, one of the best financial structures to achieve this. It's in forcing the doctors to put away money. Both, when I say doctors, I mean both the owner and the associate doctors. They're kind of putting away money for this. But really, at the end of the day, people make decisions more based on emotion, okay, than logic. So logically, this thing works. It really sounds good and it works. I would say that in addition to all of that, John, there should be some other smaller like golden handcuffs as well that don't even have to be, they're not products. They can be that if you produce at a certain level, let's say it's a female associate and she drops her kids off at daycare to come to work in the practice. I think every practice owner's mission when they have associates should be to build $1 million a year producing doctors. Mm-hmm. Okay. And you could do things where you could say this is like an executive perk that you're able to offer a stipend or reimbursement for that daycare. Let's say the daycare is $1,000 a month. If you produce at a level of $80,000 a month and you maintain a 3-month average of that, the practice would like to reimburse you for the daycare. We'd like to pay for your daycare. Who does that, John? Nobody. I mean, especially in dentistry. And that is emotionally bonding. You talk about an emotional bond between a mom who's going to work and the company that they're working for is taking care of them and paying that childcare cost. They're already going through the emotions of separating from their kids. That becomes family. Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, it's emotionally bonding, and that's even stronger. You compound that with adding this plan in to say, not only do we want to take care of you while you're working so hard here, but if you stay with us and you have a desire to be an owner and you show the leadership skills and you make it through that 24-month period, let's turn on this vesting schedule. Let's do this deferred comp plan. And as we're taking good care of you, and as you're working so hard taking care of the practice as well, that opportunity is going to set itself up. It's basically automating. It's ensuring. It's a promise, from the owner and to the associates, putting something in place. And it's just fascinating sometimes how resistant practice owners and sometimes the associates are to jump on this. I think it's one of the best vehicles that you can possibly do when everybody's wondering, like, where's the money going to come from?
Yeah.
This is a great way to put in that sweat equity, but also that money got set aside and they financially invested in the business, at the end of that point. So
and I think more young doctors who are going into associateships need to be more familiar with some of these options on the front end, because it's like after year 2 or 3, they're like, well, I helped take this practice from $1 million to 1.7 million. What do I get for that 700,000? Nothing. You're not the owner.
Right.
But had you initiated a conversation on the front end, we might have been able to set something up. But on the front end, we need to know what's important to you, and there's a lot of creative ways. There's a lot of creative ways to compensate people that provide a lot of value to them, but doesn't necessarily takes less financial resources out of the practice. For example, health insurance. Doctors are really, really quick at just giving folks raises. They come and ask for a raise. Here's a raise. Come and ask for a raise. Here's a raise. And you'll watch like their payroll percentage escalate over time, because like one of the things I run into a lot, and I get in trouble with this comment sometimes, but I stand by it. And it is, well, the reason my payroll is 33% is because everybody's been with me for 30 years. I think that's fantastic. I think that's amazing that you have that kind of tenure. That's a wonderful asset to have. And if they have been with you for 30 years, theoretically, they would be more efficient. They would be more effective. Their skill set would be more broad, and the results would offset the additional expense of compensating them at a higher level. So your payroll wouldn't have escalated. Your payroll would have been controlled. Like your payroll escalates when you overpay based on the value received. Now, some of those conversations are executive level conversations that the team is kind of at the mercy of. They don't control whether the doctor keeps their fee schedule current. They don't control whether the doctor drops an insurance plan that's not very productive, or if the doctor schedules efficiently, or if they want 3 hours for every crown. Right? They don't get to make those kinds of decisions. So that's one of the things that we got to help them kind of unpack a little bit, because I don't want the team to be at the mercy of poor executive decisions. Okay. But say health insurance, they're really quick to give raises, but they're not as quick to make investments in health insurance. And if you think about it, health insurance is tax deductible. So I don't pay payroll taxes on that. Whereas if I give them, and let's say the health insurance, the premium's $400 a month, and I give them a raise of $400 a month. Well, the raise of $400 a month doesn't just cost me $400 a month. It costs me $465 because I'm paying withholdings.
Right.
Well, health insurance premium, I'm just paying $400 a month. So, there's a lot of opportunities out there to where you can provide value to your team to promote retention that doesn't necessarily equate to a radical increase in the expenses?
Well, so some comments on that. I think number one, again, being too nice, John. I think when it comes to health insurance, that's something in the marketplace that, dentistry has had it really good for many years. And they've always been these small businesses that just happen to get away with not offering those kind of benefits. But now they have major competitors in their space. Mm-hmm. And, any kind of more structured corporate backed, dental practice enterprise, they're going to offer health insurance, 401k, all those standard benefits. And so private practice has to step up their game in that area. You can look at it as, maybe some of your costs are going up, but the truth is, when it comes to a team, even if they, whether you've given those team raises, whether you're adding those additional benefits of health insurance and 401k matching, the job is when you do those things to make it understood with your team that their job is to help doctor production increase. It's the only way to scale. It's the only way to cover those costs and create profitability. And so, team cost is pretty much a fixed cost. Everyone's paid hourly or salary. And the only variable costs in dentistry are doctor pay, labs, and supplies. If you can add doctors with, you don't have to double every team member. If you can get those team members to buy in, okay, that, hey, we're going to take very good care of you in this practice, but we're going to be high achievers here. And we need to step up our game as we provide all these additional benefits. We need to, as we add these doctors as well, the team's goal is to help those, the entire organization's goal and mission is to make every doctor $1 million a year producing doctor. So whether that's from the person handling the marketing, making sure that the marketing is effective, to the people answering the phones, making sure they're converting into appointments, to the doctors and how they diagnose and treatment plan being uniform. Ultimately, though, to teaching like conversion and helping with the speed. You brought up the word efficiency, John. Speed and efficiency. That's where the team comes in and helps if they can help the doctors with the proper scheduling and then with the assisting and making them faster. Then all of those things take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's what really happens is you see those stories that you brought up of doctors that have had a practice for a couple decades. They've had consistency in their team, but they really haven't changed their model. Like they haven't totally increased their production. They haven't all added doctors. Like they've just given these raises just because people have been with them over time, right? And it's okay to do that as long as it comes with the understanding of, we will always take care of you as a team member here. We will always pay you well, but when we're here to work, we're here to work. And we've got to our mission is to make every doctor $1 million a year producing doctor. Then the profit margins, the scaling, it all takes care of itself.
Yeah.
If you have a bunch of doctors doing average or mediocre numbers, you're going to have a profitability problem.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Dentistry is a very profitable business model, which is why, private equity is so interested in it. It's consistent. You've got guaranteed demand, right? And I mean, there's not enough dentists. If everyone decided to go to the dentist tomorrow, there's not enough providers in the country to accommodate the demand.
Right.
Right. So you've got built-in demand, guaranteed demand. And at 30,000 feet, I would say if you've got a profitability problem in dentistry, you've got a decision problem. Either you don't know what decision to make, or you're not willing to make that decision. And if you go down 10,000 feet, then you get into some underlying variables like you're inefficient with your schedule and time, or you are. So I would say three things. You're inefficient with your schedule or time. You are inefficient, or your price, the fees that you charge or the insurance reimbursements that you're getting are not healthy, or not where they need to be or could be. And then thirdly, and this is probably the biggest one, is communication. You're not communicating effectively to yourself, or you're not communicating effectively to your team. And therefore the areas of opportunity tend to prolong over time, as opposed to being able to solve problems and create solutions much more rapidly.
and communicating effectively to the patients.
And to patients, yeah.
Sometimes that's some of the conversion problems there amongst the doctors.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Okay, good. So let's jump over to, real quick, I'm taking some notes here as we're chatting. Let's jump over to the real estate side real quick. So obviously, owning the real estate that your practice is operating in makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I see a lot of folks run into, they get in these leases, and let's say that the space that they're leasing is 8 operatories or 6 operatories, and then they get to where they're blowing the doors off of all 6 operatories. And what I tell people is, if you've got a 6 operatory facility, that those 6 operatories aren't fully maximized until you're blowing the doors off of all 6 as a fee for service office. As long as you have in-network participation, then you can back out of insurance plans to control the demand so that the confines of the real estate that you have are sufficient to accommodate that number of patients. So you've got a button there that you can push, okay? But let's say that you're in a lease, you don't own it, and let's say your goal is to get an associate in there as quickly as possible, and insurance is a great strategy to grow your active patient base. And you're not quite there yet. You're in one of those 4 operatory setups, and so you're not quite there yet, and you need to add space, right? Well, you don't own the building, so you can't blow a wall out. And so what I see a lot of times happen here, it's actually a great thing if you're a buyer, because the number of practices out there that have bottlenecked hygiene departments because they lack the capacity or didn't make the decision to grow or add capacity when it was needed is a huge, huge plus for buyers. Because as a buyer, that practice is limited in what it's collecting. So you're getting a killer deal, on the price. Then you buy the practice, and all you've got to do is relieve the pressure in the schedule, add the capacity that's needed, and that thing explodes. Like, it doubles in 6 months. And it's not a miracle. It's just a mismanaged schedule. Okay. So as a buyer, that's a great opportunity. But let's say that you just bought that practice, right? And you're like, okay, well, I can't grow beyond the space that I have. At what point would you recommend people, I don't know, at what point would you recommend people make that transition from leasing a space to making the investment? Because it can be a considerable investment, right? If you're buying $1 million space, you're going to put 20% down. Theoretically, it's $200,000. You might have to build it out at $150 a square foot. So that gets expensive. So you got all these upfront costs. Am I going to be able to generate the revenue to accommodate, the liability that I just created? At what point and what guidance would you provide them there in terms of when's the right time to build a space?
All right. So I have so many good answers for this that I think are things that people should just, jot down or commit to memory. Number one, let's talk about, the cash flow. For a good rule of thumb, if you're going to, buy a building and want to know how much is going to be the cash flow, how much is going to be the payment, and compare that to the rent that you pay today. Mm-hmm. A good rule of thumb is a loan for a building is going to be about $7,000 a month in payment for every $1 million of loan. So in other words, if you're spending $7,000 a month in rent right now, that would buy you $1 million building. Okay. And my metric for determining when is the right time to, expand and move out of the space and buy your own building to have more chairs, I run off a metric of revenue per chair. And in my experience, since 2010, I've witnessed a revenue per chair range in dental practices ranging between $25,000 to $40,000 per chair per month. And it does not matter which chairs are designated for hygiene only and which chairs are designated for dentistry. The practice that I grew up in did not have separate chairs for hygiene and dentistry. All chairs did all things, and the people moved around the patients. So at about $35,000 of revenue per chair per month. So you can take your annual collections divided by the number of chairs you have divided by 12 months. And about 35,000 of revenue per chair is a good indicator that you're either at or nearing your capacity. You're running very efficiently. You probably starting to have some scheduling problems, and people are having to wait. And if people can't get into your practice for 6 or 8 weeks, especially for hygiene, you have a significant problem. You're going to have a declining effect. You're going to be starting to lose money on all of your marketing dollars. So you got to create that space. At 35,000 of revenue per chair, you're running at extreme efficiency. So if you'll calculate that, as you're moving closer and closer to that number, you better start planning on expanding. And John, churches figured this out a long time ago. Okay. That when people would come to church on Sunday, if they went inside and couldn't find a seat, some of them would turn away and say, I'll come back next Sunday. Or if they couldn't find a parking spot in the parking lot. And this was the evolution of mega churches. Okay. It was expanding the space and expanding the number of locations. If you really look back at the last, I'd say, 20 years of churches growing, they learned this first. And so, this applies to really any business model and dentistry for sure. Okay. So now you have a building, you need to determine, how many operatories you're going to put in there. And, what's the cost of the potential land? Is it an existing structure that you have to renovate, or are you doing a ground up? As of today, the financing still exists where you can get 100% financing in real estate. There are some lenders that will do that, particularly for dentistry, but that will be an SBA loan. And so you'll have personal collateral on everything. Okay. They'll have collateral on your home and all that. However, you can get 100% financing, but certainly it should be your goal to start setting aside, try to have, 20%. That may not be possible for everyone. If the building cost for them in their area is going to be, $2 million, they may not have 400,000 built up just yet. Some of these SBA lenders still want 10%. I would say if you can't get the 20%, try to find the 100% financing, because construction is a little bit of cash flow hell. Okay. The great news is when you do that construction, in almost all cases, if it's a large project, you have to look at everybody's numbers uniquely. But in a lot of cases, that becomes a year where the business owner gets a cash flow or a windfall, okay, where they pay little to no taxes in the year that they do their construction and complete the construction. It has to apply to the year that you complete your building and get your certificate of occupancy. But you do a strategy called cost segregation. Anyone listening to this should research cost segregation. You can look up cost segregation, Dental Economics Magazine. You can find articles. It's a real thing. It's one of the largest tax deductions in the tax code. Okay. And the tax code is primarily incentivizes you to make big moves, improving, growing, buying, building businesses and commercial real estate that houses businesses, because those things improve our economy. That's what the tax code rewards you the most for. It's things that the government views improves our economy. And owner-occupied commercial real estate is one of the largest ones. Okay. So you may take out debt to get the project done, and you may wipe out all of your taxable income in that year. You may have some that even carries forward. You get to accelerate all the depreciation on that commercial real estate that you build in. But I would say, again, the point of expansion is calculating the revenue per chair, 35,000 per chair per month. You're starting to hit your limit. Now, to get there, like you said, John, you want to see if you can maximize the whole space. Like, can you go from 4 days to 5 days with another doctor in there? Can you expand hours? Can you make it work in the space to get to the 35? Or if you feel like you're at 35,000 per chair, did you do that on 4 days a week? If you expanded, I've only met 3 doctors that have ever done more than 40,000 a month per chair. Okay. I've had 42 and 46,000 per chair. And what's interesting too, is they went from this one doctor I'm thinking of, he was doing 42,000 per chair. He went from 8 chairs to building a facility with, I believe it had 14 chairs. Or no, it was plumbed, I think, for close, it was like 20 chairs. But what he did is he went from 8 chairs, he outfitted, I think, a total of 12. And he said, I'm not going to outfit the next chairs beyond 12 until I get back to my 42,000 a month per chair.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So once he achieved it, he saw, okay, there is a metric here.
Now there's a range there too, right? Like, because you've got different business models within dentistry, Medicaid, all the way up to fee for service. So fee for service is going to be on the 40, 41, 42 end of the spectrum, whereas Medicaid, you might be at capacity at 15,000.
Possibly. I have not dealt with, so I always tell people all three models work: Medicaid, PPO, and fee for service. All can be successful and all can be failures. I've seen some very successful Medicaid practices,
Sure.
and they're very efficient with their time. They have expanded hours. They have multiple doctors. They know that they get a fraction of every fee for service dollar, so they have to have a multiplier of everything else that they do. But yeah, I think if you have a history, if you've expanded your days and your hours, and you have a history of some maximum, per chair that you've reached, and you feel like you're just capped out in space, then you've got to you've got to plan for expansion. And like you said earlier, if you're either going to spend the money and put that plumbing and put all that value into somebody else's building, or you can put it in something that you own.
Right.
And the business, this is the greatest part about buying real estate when you own a business. Okay. If you don't own a business and you're buying real estate, you're buying that with your personal after-tax dollars out of your pocket. Mm-hmm. You own a business and you put it into a building that you also own. You own that building personally. Okay. You'll put it into an LLC for protection, but you own it personally as a personal asset. And your business is able to buy that personal asset with tax-free dollars and pay it off with tax-free dollars because you get to deduct rent. And once you sell your dental practice in the future, you lose those deductions. You lose the tax shelter. Hopefully you've got it paid off. And now you have this personal asset free and clear that got paid for with all tax-free dollars. And it's going to provide you an annuity in rental income in your retirement. So back to the numbers again, 7,000 a month per million, that the bank is going to basically look at your bottom line, your net income, and say, is there enough cash flow for this new loan payment? And, whatever that number is, if it equates to, you're doing $1.5 million building and it's $10,000 a month payment, at minimum, they're going to want to see $120,000 at the bottom line, and they'll take into consideration, you're already paying a certain amount in rent and all that. But in almost all cases, unless you're in an area of the country that just does not have land, whether it's, thinking of like Manhattan or something like that, you need to try to find a way to own your own office building. It just supercharges your business and your personal net worth.
Yeah. I guess where my mind is there, because you see it much more on the financial side than I do. And I see it kind of on the operational side.
Right.
I love what you said, which is essentially you said practices with capacity grow, practices without capacity don't.
That's right.
You look at a startup that's got half a hygienist and a full-time doctor and a front desk person, but they can see you at virtually any time on any day. Startups grow 50, 60, 70% per year in the beginning. An established practice doing 1.5 million that's been there for 40 years might be growing 2 to 4. Right. It's just because our ability to accommodate patient needs isn't on the same level as the startup. Okay. So I would say, I guess where my mind is I might have a highly insurance driven practice and a fee for service practice. And let's say, and there are variables there. Okay. So the fee for service practice, they might be very comprehensive. They're doing IV sedation. They're doing all on fours, implant surgeries, third molars, endo, very strong perio percentage. That's going to be a lot more profitable practice. Their collections are going to be a lot higher. They might have the same number of operatories as this practice. Right. And this practice is highly insurance driven, outdated fee schedule, hasn't renegotiated insurance reimbursements in 20 years. And they're only doing crown and bridge. And it's a very reactive dentist. So like their crown to filling ratio is like 0.5 to 1. Right. They're going to, based on those numbers, I think they're going to reach capacity at that dollar number a lot faster than these folks, because like if you can't get a new patient on your schedule within 24 to 48 hours, can't get a recare patient on your schedule in 4 to 6 weeks, can't get major production on your schedule in 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. At that point, we need to begin looking at how we can add capacity or become more efficient with the capacity that we currently have.
Yeah, I think step one is become more efficient with the capacity you currently have. Check those boxes, John, of like updating the fee schedule, and go making sure that every procedure is offered under one roof. Again, we were in a 4-chair practice 4 days a week to start, and we pretty much for the most part kept it at that, and we got to just shy of 1.7 million in those 4 chairs. And if you do that math, it was the 35,000 per chair.
Yeah,
so that's what I lived and experienced. It was all PPO practice. The only way to expand was either expand hours. We tested some opening at 7 a.m. for hygiene. We tested some staying open until 7 p.m. for hygiene. And we did that, 1 day a week here, 1 day a week there. Eventually we opened Friday. That was a game changer. We required a deposit if you wanted a Friday appointment. Eventually we did a half day Saturday, required a deposit. And that got our serious patients that were serious about those appointments only doing that. And we took it as far as we could in terms of number of days and hours. And then I looked at the doctor and I said, look, physically, you can't do any more. We were seeing like over 50 new patients a month. And I said, you need to get rid of your office space. Office space inside of a dental office is like a complete waste of space. Mm-hmm. Like nothing productive happens inside the dental office. And that should be an operatory. So I said, you need to get rid of your office. Do an office at home if you want. Get rid of your office in here. There was another small area that was used for storage. I said, you got a space for 2 more operatories in here. And you need an associate because you can't work all 6 of these. Okay. And at first he was resistant to that. Eventually he ended up expanding it to those 6 chairs, and that took it to a new level in those 6 chairs. And now he owned that building. It was a small building. And I want to say this too, John. I think you have to come to a decision and ask what is right for my business. Okay. And every area is unique. It's okay if you've built a great business, a great practice that's maxed out in a space that you rent, that's difficult to relocate. If you can't find the real estate, you can't fully relocate it, you're going to have to come to terms with, if I can't relocate it and own the real estate, do I want to have another location? And maybe that other location, you make it your goal that the next location is one that you own the real estate on, and be okay with, I'm going to max out the number of chairs that I've got in this rented space. And it was a great foundation, and try to make that one debt free. Mm-hmm. And let that one serve as supporting building your next future locations. Okay. And financially, it can help support buying that real estate for that second location. So it doesn't always work out that you're able to automatically get out of, stop renting, transfer or relocate into a building that you own. It doesn't always work out. Be okay with that. You need to assess every possible option. But I think everyone, if they have time in their career, it should be on their checklist of their goals to use the dental business to buy real estate that houses that dental business. And look, I believe in this so much. John, I'm located in Atlanta, Georgia, but last year I bought a dental building in Mississippi. Okay. Because dentistry, as you said earlier, it's consistent, it's recession proof. There's so much demand. I don't necessarily want to work in the dental practice again and deal with the people. I have a very similar model of people here in this accounting practice. But what I do like is collecting rent. And it's one of the best investments you can make for consistent rent. Okay, is commercial real estate housed by a dental practice. The new buzzword in real estate commercial real estate is internet resistant tenants. Okay, and there's like a list of these internet resistant tenants that are great, consistent tenants. Dentistry is at the top. Dentistry, number one. Chiropractics, dry cleaners, believe it or not, nail salons. These are all businesses, and your Domino's Pizza or your Subway restaurants. These are all businesses that have existed through recessions, now through crises. They have to have a storefront. They're going to take care of their storefront. They're not going to damage your property. And the most valuable part of a building with a dental practice in it is the plumbing. The plumbing is the most expensive part to put in. And once it's in there, it can always be a dental office. And so I would also challenge, practice owners to think of that. If you feel like you can't own the real estate of your practice that you're operating, maybe you can own the real estate of somebody else's practice. The only downside is you don't have the deduction of rent. Okay, the best, most preferred part is owner occupied commercial real estate, because you get to pay that thing off with tax-free dollars using your business.
Yeah, you mentioned something that you're speaking my language now, because I've got one of my clients actually got referred to me by one of my dental clients, and this guy has a very, very successful real estate business, and so he's wanting help on leadership structure, just structuring his business, dealing with people and how to expand. They're wanting to scale. It's him and his wife, and I'm wanting to scale my real estate portfolio, and so I was having a conversation with him last week, and, obviously right now in the market on the residential side, it's like, is the market going to hold? And he said something that was really interesting, because, just since I had been in this house, it's appreciated, maybe been in this house since October, and it's appreciated almost 60K since October. And I'm like, well, man, that's really good. And then I looked at the house that I sold when I moved here that I didn't want to sell, but my real estate agent convinced me it was the right thing to do. It's appreciated like 40K. And I'm like, I knew I shouldn't have sold that house. But so one of the bedrooms in this house is the one I'm sitting in, right? Because I either work from home or I'm on the road. And he mentioned something to me, and I want to get your feedback on this, because I listened to Grant Cardone talk about the same thing. He says, I'll never own the place that I live. He said, I will only rent. And then I was talking to this guy, and he told me the exact opposite. And so Grant does own the real estate that he lives in. He just has that real estate under an LLC, and he rents it from himself. So he does rent, but he rents from himself. So he does, in fact, own the real estate. And so I was like, well, does it make sense for me to take my house that I live in and work in and put it under an LLC and then rent this room from my LLC?
Okay, so you gotta dive a little deeper into it. So doing that, if this is like the only real estate that you own and you put it in an LLC and you rent back, you're just moving money from one pocket to another. Mm-hmm. What Grant Cardone does is, one of his big businesses is a huge real estate portfolio. It's a real estate company, and so his home is included in that company, mm-hmm. right? It's a company with its primary business. They own multiple properties, and its primary business is rental income producing properties, right? His home happens to be one of those properties. Mm-hmm. And so he rents from a company that he owns, tax deductions applied to that company. It's a beautiful thing. But most people, what they hear is, well, I just need to open an LLC, put my house into it, and then I pay rent, from me to the LLC. The LLC pays the mortgage. You don't really save anything if that's the only property you own. Okay, so you have to have a business behind it, fueling it. I'm in complete agreement with his strategy, though. The home is not an investment. An investment is something that produces you a return, and ideally a cash flow return, right? When you're talking about the home appreciation, you only realize that appreciation when you sell, right? It's your home value is kind of like a stock market value. Like, it's going to go up and down over time and through different markets. Right. And it's all about, you're looking at the asset. Like, what do you own the asset for? Do you own it to accumulate assets and you want it to appreciate, and then you're going to sell it one day and spend it down? Or do you own it to provide you consistent mailbox money, cash flow, rental income for the rest of your life? And I look at it, just like returns. I don't mind sharing the numbers with you. I bought this property in Mississippi for $325,000. Okay. It wasn't that expensive. It had 5 plumbed operatories. All right. That's the most important part. They're fully plumbed. They're going to have to do it's going to be for a startup practice. They're going to have to do their own tenant improvements. That's going to be their cost, not mine, where they're going to, outfit the space to their liking. And I'm going to get $4,000 a month rent, $48,000 a year. If you do $48,000 a year divided by $325,000 investment, that's almost a 15% return. Okay. It's pretty incredible. And by the way, the rental income goes up by 3% a year because there will be a 7-year lease and rents will increase by 3% every year. You can't get that in residential. The other part about residential that's difficult is you have to you pretty much have to renew every year or find a new tenant more frequently. When you're dealing with commercial in a space like that, you're signing leases for some period of time, 3, 5, 7, 10 years. Mm-hmm. But I am a believer in a lot of the philosophies of Grant Cardone as well. And I just look at everything as, and then when I'm coaching clients too, I think a lot of times you may talk to them, John, on their collections goals, setting collections goals. I don't know if you talk to them about, setting personal income goals. That's something that I a lot of times will talk to them about. And they're like, well, I've never set a personal income goal. I'm like, when you tie the personal income goal, your take-home income, to your collections goal, things start to rapidly improve faster because you're driven, right?
How else do you know what the practice needs to collect if you don't have a...
Right. You got to do the math backwards. That's exactly right. Now, that personal income goal is still a working income goal. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's phase 1 is like, are you focused on a working income goal? But what's your passive income goal? That's phase 2. And you've got to start setting a passive income goal, a portfolio of passive income while you're still working. Mm-hmm. Okay. When you get to retirement, there's a lot more pressure there. If you don't have any working income coming in, you've got this maybe lump sum of money. You got to figure out, do I want to trade it and buy something that's going to give me passive income? Is that a product or is that a rental property or what is that? It's a lot easier when you're building the passive income portfolio while you're still working. Okay, so that by the time you sell your business and you stop practicing clinically and you turn off the working income, you've got passive income that's replaced that.
Right.
I think every doctor at minimum should start their passive income goal at 500,000. And that's an arbitrary number without knowing anybody's personal situation. I think at minimum, that's where they should start. If you look at my first property here, I'm 10% of the way to that number. 48,000 a year. I'm basically 10% of the way to 500,000 a year. And, then when you realize that and you realize, oh, it's not that difficult. There's a compounding effect over time, because if you get these properties, you pay them off, all of those properties are cash flowing the future properties you purchase. And you're able to buy more properties with less and less debt each time. And that, by the way, that can be used looking at dental practices as well. Yeah. I'm a big believer in if you are going to go multi-location, pay off location number 1 first. Use that to help you pay off location number 2 faster. Once location number 2 is paid off, use the cash flows from locations 1 and 2 to help you pay off number 3 faster, and accumulate cash. And you can buy practices or buy real estate with less and less debt, the further down the line you get.
Yeah. And there's one of the limitations that you run into, and this would be true on the real estate side, this would also be true on the practice ownership side, is the bank's only going to give you so much money. And there's a point at which on the practice side, it's a little bit more complex because they're also looking at rate of growth and return and profitability and your ability to lead effectively. And when you were started talking about passive income, and my mind kind of went to John C. Maxwell's 5 levels of leadership, because at that level, when you start talking about accelerating passive income, that creates more need for you to get to that level 3 reproduction, to where you're able to produce the same results that you can produce through other people.
Yes.
That's where your passive income begins to accelerate. And so the bank, your financing ability is limited. So, and this is one of the reasons why people go with private equity, is because their plans to scale growth and get to a certain number faster, they have to leverage private equity or somebody else's bucket of money in order to do that, because the bank's just not that aggressive with their lending. And so if you scale too fast and the growth isn't inherent in the practices that you acquire. Now, if you buy a practice that's collecting 700,000 that has inherent tremendous growth potential, and you take it from 700,000 to 2 million in 12 months, bank loves that. They say, absolutely, I want to give you more money. But if you buy a practice that doesn't have like the bottleneck hygiene department, or you're not removing a reactive bread and butter dentist with a proactive, very comprehensive GPR, and you're accelerating growth that way, and the practice doesn't like explode, then now the timeline that you're on kind of goes out a little further.
Yeah, there's a constant, debt to value ratio, or debt to equity ratio. So they'll put a value or equity on your business and how much debt there is. Then there's a debt to income ratio. And your job as a business owner, if you had to take debt out to get started, your job has to be twofold along the way, which is you have to save cash in the business and pay off debt, both. You can't just pay the minimums. If you want to continue growing, the reason that people, I think, paint themselves into a corner, they come running to sell to a private equity firm or DSO, is they've hit that limit, but if you can create free cash flow by getting all the debts paid off, that's how you see some of these privately owned, you can call them DSOs because they're multi-location, they're modeled that way. They're not a legal DSO. They're still privately owned by a doctor, but we have a client that has 17 offices, self-built. Okay. But it took time, and they were paying each office was paid off kind of consecutively. It creates this compounding effect to be able to continue to expand and self-fund more of it. Yeah. Right. You should not be trying to take out the max debt when you're on your fifth location. Now some of these private practitioners that are trying to model themselves like a DSO, or they're trying to have these goals of, acquiring 3 and 5 practices a year. That's where they end up running into money in your conventional financing. It's going to dry up. You hit those ratios and those limits. I mean, our banks, all of our conventional banks, have shareholders to answer to. Okay, they have to make their numbers, and they have to assess their risk. And so once you hit their risk limit and that threshold, you have 2 options. You either have to pay down some of that debt and free the cash flow up as you continue to grow, or you're just going to sell out and have somebody buy your debt out, basically.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So there are things that you can do to kind of shift that a little bit with debt restructures and refinances and those types of things, but there are limitations on that as well. Because like Chris said, there are risk thresholds that financial institutions vary. Some financial institutions are a little bit more aggressive. They'll take a little bit more risk. Others are a little bit more conservative, so picking a really good banking partner that understands what your business plan is, where you're headed, and that they're there to support you with that, I think is important too. So real quick, before we wrap up here, you have a lot of dental practices, a lot of dental clients across the country. And a lot of those are very progressive, very proactive folks that are scaling and building large enterprises. Do you tend to see more acquisitions as they scale, more acquisitions or more startups?
In the private space, I tend to still see more acquisitions. If possible, preferably, I'm a bigger fan of acquisitions, because you have a starting base of revenue and recare, in a practice. It just makes things easier. You have something to work with that you have an existing engine that you can fine tune, and make better and grow. But my prediction is, John, especially I think there will be, the market always tends to correct itself. I think with the consolidation of dentistry, and with there being less and less practices for young doctors to outright purchase and afford, I think we're going to see in the future a lot more startups. Now what you're asking me is a little bit different. I'm just kind of like talking about what I see in the market. I think we're going to see a lot of these young doctors that are associates right now kind of be forced into doing their own practice through a startup. I think there's going to be a lot more startup financing to come available because the traditional banks are not getting as many deals because of the consolidation happening in private equity space. But in general, in order for you to be an existing practice owner and you want to expand locations and you want to do a startup, all of your systems have to be in place at all of your offices. And I always tell the business owner, it's the business owner that has to go to the new location. It's the business owner that has to moonlight between existing locations and new location, because you're the one that installed the culture at all your existing locations. You've got to go install that culture at the startup. You've got those systems hopefully documented, and all the other, you got to document it and put it into the new startup. So if the key piece is not money, it's time. If the practice owner has the time, they're not tied to the chair in some of the other practices. If they have the time to be able to withstand the lag that it takes in doing a startup and making it grow and be profitable, then that is a financially it's financially an easier way without any debt, without any financing. There's nothing to buy. You're having to get some working capital, and maybe you're having to do some build out costs. You can get in for a lower amount. And if there's this equation of, I think it's a life equation, really, money times time times effort or energy. It's a multiplication equation, and you can't escape it. If any one of those factors is a 1 or a 0, you're not going to get a return. So if you want to get in with less money, you're going to have to put in more time and energy into a startup, right? So that's the real question I think you have to determine when it comes to making that choice of startup or acquisition. Acquisition, you might have to come up with more money up front, but there'll be less time and energy to get to the same maybe result.
Yeah, and I mean, if you do it right, there's going to be enough cash. Well, if this is not the case, I wouldn't do it at all. Right. But when you look at the free and clear cash that practice is spinning off, it's not sufficient to cover the liability, cover the note at the bank, and provide you a little bit of extra money. Does not make sense to do that deal unless, and this is a big unless you know what you're looking at in that asset and you see that practice is currently collecting 500,000 but should be collecting $1 million.
The upside potential. Yeah.
If you know that potential, that inherent growth is sitting right there, and the person that owns it just doesn't know how to push the button, and the cash flow is not there, then I would say, yeah, well, let's do that one, because we know what button to push to get it to where it's spinning off, $50,000-$60,000 a year to you, and that we're going to be there in 6 months.
Right.
But yeah, otherwise that's not the right practice to buy.
Yeah, and I'll say it's almost impossible. Nothing's impossible. You can find money, but it's almost impossible to be able to do a startup with real estate these days. Everything is so high right now.
Yeah.
But and that's kind of one of the downsides too, I think, is you don't have any existing cash flow to help you fund real estate and paying that down. So
they go on the acquisition route. It's like it's OPM. Right? Or not, well, I guess not necessarily, but you're able to use the cash that is consistent and predictable in the business to cover the expansion, cover the acquisition. Didn't cost you anything, because most of these guys coming out of associateships are like, all right, well, I'm making about 200,000. I want to make at least 200,000 as an owner. Well, sometimes depending on the practice that you buy, it may or may not work out that way. You may take a cut in income to become a practice owner, but it also depends on the practice that you buy, and it depends on your skill set.
Yep.
Right. But I certainly encourage people to look at the market that you're going into. Let's study the landscape. Let's see if there are acquisition opportunities. And if there are acquisition opportunities and they're just not for sale yet, well, let's reach out to them and let's see if maybe they just haven't considered selling. But let's look at that opportunity first, because in most markets around the U.S. right now, in order to make a startup work and scale it very quickly, you've got to go into that market with something very special, right? Like if you're in a rural portion, especially in a more metro area. I've got a client who is the saturation is at like 6,800, right? Like that's one dentist per 6,800 people that live in that area. And there are markets out there that are like 1 in 500, right? That are very, very dense. The more saturated the area, the more unique you're going to have to be. So if all the dentists in there are like 60 years old, out of date, no technology, carpet in the operatories, right? And you go in with a nice fancy, all the technology, CERAC, digital, the whole nine, you're extremely unique in that market. And the startup scenario right there makes a lot of sense if the guys around you don't want to sell. But also, if you're buying a practice, one of the first things that I would look at, whether you're buying or starting in, let's say, Tullahoma, Tennessee, who are the other dentists there and how old are they? Because if you've got 4 or 5 other dentists in your zip code that are going to be retiring in the next 5 to 10 years, that's the future growth of your practice, because now we can acquire and merge them in. And then on the real estate side, the other thing that we didn't really discuss is like a reverse merger opportunity. So if you don't have the real estate, you want to expand and you can't find the land to build the building on, and you can't find the building for sale, maybe you can find a practice for sale where the doctor that owns that practice also owns the real estate. And that real estate would accommodate both his practice and your practice when you merge the two together.
Yep.
And you could just do a reverse merger. We do a lot of those. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, good. But yeah, I definitely think the acquisition route would be the first consideration. If it's just not going to happen and you're absolutely dead set on living in this particular area, just be careful have a very, very well thought out business plan going in, because you're, like Chris said, you're fighting a little bit of an uphill battle there,
Totally agreed.
Very good. Well, Chris, I think I have taken all of our time this morning, which I'm grateful for. I really appreciate your insight and expertise. I would love to do this again. I think there's a lot more there that we can unpack. But very appreciative. If folks want to get in touch with you, how would they reach out?
Sure. Well, first of all, John, I just want to say this was great. This was such a fun conversation. It was easy, and it was, time flew by. That's how you know how good it was. You can reach us online at profi2020.com, profi2020.com, as well as on all social media and YouTube. Check out our YouTube channel with all of our videos for educational content. But most of social media, just at profi2020.
Excellent. So, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. I'm very appreciative, and we'll connect and we'll get another one done here soon. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And if you need anything from me, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks a lot, John. Everybody stay profitable out there.